Okay, welcome, friends. Great to see everybody here. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. How is everybody doing today? Who have we got here? Frater RC, great to have you. Let's see, Flavius Brocephus, good to have you. Glad you guys are already in the chat here. Welcome to this session on the Gospel of Thomas, which is promoting my new course on the Gospel of Thomas, which will hold live in, well, just 2.5 weeks is the start date. So at the top of the chat, I've pinned a discount URL for those of you wanting to join the course. Just know that that's there. You can get 10% off by hitting that particular link. And when you do so, you'll find out that the course is going to be held 9 p.m. Eastern, US and Canada time. It's going to start on June 2nd and going to go to July 21st. We're going to have 8 live sessions. So essentially, it's going to be every Monday evening in that early part of summer. And I really hope that many of you can join us. It will be a great time. Again, you can grab that discount code. It should save you 10% there. So take advantage of that. But apart from that, I'm just thrilled to be able to talk about Thomas with all you folks and hopefully generate some interest. We've already got Flavius Brocephus asking about one of the hardest, if not the hardest of all sayings, number 114. And if there's any women in the room, I hope to get to that one. That one's very important for you. Seems like Jesus is quite a country bumpkin there. Basically, if you can't pee standing up, then you can't go to heaven. So what on earth does that mean? That's a very facetious way of putting that. We'll get to that hopefully in a moment. I just want to go down here, make sure I greet everyone here. So Rudy, great to have you. Dr. Lenny, Mercurius, excellent. Pedro, hola, gracias for being here. All right. We have a quorum, I think. What I want to do in the first just 5 to 10 minutes is just introduce the course, and I'll the best way I can do that is just by showing you a graphic, which I'll just throw up onto the chat here. So we've got YouTube allowing us to share our screen, which is fantastic. So again, this is for the live course. Thank you to all who have signed up already. Please sign up if you haven't already. Again, we're going to have this on Monday evenings, 9 p.m. from June 2nd to the 21st of July. So don't miss it. I know that, probably in the summertime, you're going to be partying and going to the beach, but these sessions will be recorded for you, so you can get back if you missed a session and ask unlimited questions. Don't worry about that. What are we going to be doing? Well, in one sense, and I can get your opinion on this, my original plan was to go through the sayings just basically like 15 at a time. But I think what I'll do is give a proper introduction in that first session. And many of you know already that I put the Gospel of Thomas in Alexandria. I'm going to tell you why. I'm also going to tell you why I think it's still okay to view Thomas as a Gnostic text. More on that in a moment. But in our second session, we'll deal with Thomas on Jesus, and this is obviously really important for people. Whether or not you think Thomas is early or late, it's got this fantastic and very, very compatible and very exciting view of Jesus. I think, hey, if you're going to be a Christian, probably the only way you can do that responsibly is by being a Thomasine Christian. Thomas and the Synoptics is session number 3. So we are going to be talking about dependence. A lot of you are also interested in Marcion and Marcion's gospel. Um, I consider Marcion's gospel part of the Synoptics. Um, I think, again, regardless of whether you think Thomas is mostly dependent or independent or dependent on the Synoptics, seeing where Thomas differs from the Synoptics is often a great way to see exactly what the point is, what the point being made is. It's that difference where we see the truth come out. And then Thomas as a seedbed for the Gospel of John. There's not been as much work on this, but I think, there was an old thesis by Stephen L. Davies that the authors of the Gospel of John, or author, had in his possession something like a saying source that looked like the Gospel of Thomas, from which he pulled some sayings and ideas in order to formulate the long discourses in the Gospel of John. And I'm quite attracted to that. Of course, it would be nice if we could determine whether Thomas and John emerged from Alexandria. I'm tempted to say definitely yes on that one. But anyway, not many people are going to go for that head over heels. But I do think that that's a good hypothesis. Then we'll deal with Thomas and Paul. So what's Paul's contribution to the Gospel of Thomas? And Thomas and women. So ladies, please show up to session 6. Even if you only come to one session, come to this one. Thomas and women. He's always good for a ride, good for a laugh sometimes, and good for a ride. Up until we get to that saying 114, he seems like a total woke. But boy, when you get to that 114, boy, it's a real slap in the face. So we'll talk about that. Thomasine ethics. So what do you do if you are a Thomasine Christian? And that's basically what we're going to talk about. Turns out you don't go to wild parties and drink your own semen. You've got other things to do, like maybe being alone for a long time. We'll talk about what that means. And then finally, we'll end on my favorite topic, Thomasine deification. So, this isn't your classic, going to heaven and jumping on a trampoline with Jesus. There's a really wonderful, interesting theory of how we are with Thomas, twinned with Jesus, and we become his spiritual twins. And so we'll be talking about that very, very decisive theme in our last session. So I hope that has whet your appetite. I want to talk about one topic here just before we get to the questions, and that is, is Thomas Gnostic? When Thomas was first discovered, it was just assumed that Thomas was Gnostic. The reason being somewhat obvious and based on the manuscripts. That is, Thomas was found located right after the Secret Book of John, aka the Apocryphon of John in Nag Hammadi Codex 2. So our only complete copy of Thomas is found right next to that classic Gnostic text. And it's found right before the Gospel of Philip, which came to be viewed as Valentinian. So you've got the Gospel of Thomas sandwiched in between a classic Gnostic or Sethian text and a Valentinian text. So it was just assumed that Thomas was Gnostic like those other texts. And then beginning in the 80s and the 90s, there was a very strong reaction against that, saying that that's not significant, that that's not meaningful, that just makes, Thomas marginal. And so we need to use Thomas as a source for the historical Jesus because that's what everybody else is interested in. So we're just going to ignore Thomas as a Gnostic. And I think we're coming around to a somewhat mediating position, or at least we can. Every definition of gnosis and of Gnosticism is in some way going to be typological. That is, it's going to be based on traits or characteristics, whether you think those traits or characteristics are mainly attitudinal or doctrinal or experiential. You've got traits in there. And so some of the things that one can point out is obviously salvation by gnosis. It's by meditating on the sayings that you don't taste death. The idea of experiential gnosis and vision of God, this has been well emphasized, I think rightly, by April DeConick in her book Seek to See Him and other works, that whoever was writing this was wanting to cultivate subjectivity, which invited people to go on a mystical journey in this life, past archons, past the heavens. The idea of a divine spark through self-knowledge, we see that also in several sayings of Thomas. Again, the divine spark by itself is not Gnostic, but when you combine it with these other things, opposition to archons, human and divine. Admittedly, this is an interpretation of sayings. So, we're not saying that this is absolutely clear. It's often pointed out that Thomas doesn't have any archons, or sorry, doesn't have a demiurge, and that may well be right. But I think that you could certainly argue that it has figures that are wicked, that you're trying to get by, and those can be human or divine. And then it has what can be called a seekership outlook. This is, again, DeConnick's language, but I think it's definitely there. Jesus is asking people to seek, to find him, and he wants you to find him, and he wants you to find yourself, and that's really ultimately the same thing. So, yeah, those when you have each of these obviously by themselves, maybe apart from salvation by gnosis, it's not necessarily Gnostic. But when you start combining these features, and these are only 5 features, then I think one could argue that, we're not saying that there's an essence to Gnosticism, but it has a number of features which are shared in the larger pool of features. It doesn't have all the features, but then again, no text has all the features. And if you lack an evil creator, that's okay. Lots of other texts called Gnostic also lack an evil creator. So that's not going to ultimately ruin this project. My own personal theory is we've got someone maybe in the final stages of writing the Gospel of Thomas who is wanting to bring out the esoteric, wanting to bring out these Gnostic themes, and using and tweaking Jesus's sayings in order to do that. So the final editor, compiler could be a Gnostic and is wanting to lead you or persuade you by using the sayings of Jesus into this deeper knowledge and insight. So for much more of that, I invite everyone to join the live course. Grab 10% using the link, 10% off using the link at the top. And I highly, highly, highly look forward to seeing many of you there. This is also your chance to get to know me. So if you've just been, in the background, we haven't seen each other face to face, this is your chance. So make sure that you take it. So I'm going to turn now to the chat here and see if I can kind of piece through what you all are interested in, and appreciate you all commenting and asking questions. Again, I hope that this primes your interest. So Flavius, I'm going to go to your second comment that the immediate intellectual context that informs the Gospel of Thomas is Hellenistic. However, so much of it reminds me of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, any possible Brahman connection there. Well, if it's written in Alexandria, it could have any number of connections. Hellenism, when you say Hellenism, that doesn't actually just mean Greek culture. It means a syncretic mishmash of cultures, and that might include stuff from India. So it's not excluded, but again, you'd have to find pretty close parallels. What I think what you could imagine is happening is you've got a number of streams coming in. I would definitely want to prioritize a Hermetic stream or a native Egyptian stream before I would go to India. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when you are comparing, you're making a comment about the form of it, as I take it, uh, whereas the content of it might be quite different. Why is James so important when he was one of the proto-Catholic anti-Gnostic figures? Well, that's a very common misunderstanding of James. Actually, if you look at the Nag Hammadi library, James is a Gnostic hero, and we have not only the secret book of James in Nag Hammadi Codex 1, we've got two revelations of James in Nag Hammadi Codex 5, and it's absolutely indisputable indisputable that James was a Gnostic hero. And this, again, should remind people that it's very simplistic to think that there can only be one view of the apostles. Any appeal to the apostles has to be Catholic or Orthodox. That's just not the case. Even Peter, who obviously, is viewed as the first pope basically by the Roman Catholic Church, there is also a Gnostic Peter. So obviously, yes, there's a proto-Orthodox James, there's a Jewish Christian James, but there's also a Gnostic James. It is not at all unusual to have James there as someone that's important. But of course, saying 12 on James is right next to saying 13 on Thomas, and it just looks like Thomas gets a whole lot more than James does in the end. Some have even thought that it's something of a joke that James gets all that authority, because if he's given worldly authority and the world is denigrated in the Gospel of Thomas, then maybe James is actually being denigrated. I don't quite follow that one, but it's an interesting proposal. Is there any thematic or theological connection between the Gospel of Thomas and the Great Declaration? Well, I don't think so. I would love to find some if you have any. I mean, I think the Great Declaration was also written in Alexandria, so I'd love to find some connection there, but I haven't. So if you have anything like in mind, like a specific passage, just let me know. Same thing with Menander and Cerinthus. Just hypothesize something. Okay. All right. Thank you, Flavius. Again, it's good to have everyone here. I hope everyone is well on this blessed Monday evening. It's a Tuesday morning here where I am. I hope everyone had a nice weekend, nice Mother's Day. All right. Always interested in fighting for time. Yeah. Well, you can come to the live sessions, come to the ones that you can come to, and then catch the recordings that you can't. And then follow up with me later to get filled in if you want. Again, it's sort of like a basic rule in education, that's not just for brick and mortar education, but for online education as well. It's sort of what you make of it, right? So what are you willing to invest in? Is something else more important to you that is actually taking time? Or are you willing to invest in the things that are really important to you? Ultimately, I think all education is really self-education. It really comes down to, are you motivated to learn something? And even people with no cash or resources, if they're really motivated to learn something, they will make the time and do that. I hope I'm not the Boltman of our time. I mean, he was just not. He sort of looks sad. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture to him, but but yeah, obviously, I appreciate the compliment, Flavius. Gregory, what can you tell us about the phrase "single ones"? Yeah, if you think of that, it goes back to a Syriac word like ikidaya that appears in the several sayings. Does it seem late or in line with the early sayings? Um, well, I think so. Here's some general background. So I think that after the discussion of Simon Gathercall in 2012, it's generally agreed that there's no Aramaic behind the Gospel of Thomas. I think there might be some holdouts there, but I don't think many. So going back to an Aramaic word or a Syriac word, any kind of Semitic language word, it might not, it just, that's not the context here. We're dealing with an original Greek text, just like all the other gospels, or I should say the big four. And but it is interesting. So the Greek word is monokos, which is obviously where we get monk later. So does that mean single ones? April Deconic often takes it in the sense of celibate ones. You could even translate it bachelors. I mean, they are, yeah, we don't know actually their social practice. I don't think what's being recommended is that we be alone all the time. But something there is going on, and we've got to piece that together. People talk about a Thomasine community. Can you be a community of single ones? Probably. Does it seem late? Well, again, earlier late is kind of like a trap that you don't want to fall into. I'm not sure we can do that. But does it seem like it's editorial that an editor is adding in that material? Absolutely, it does seem that way because it's often these phrases like blessed or the monachoi, the single ones, kind of get tacked on at the end of more traditional sayings. And so the general opinion has been that yes, these are things tacked on by an editor in order to lead you again toward a more, shall we say, mystical, esoteric, Gnostic view of Jesus. Now, maybe you think that's the true Jesus, right? In which case, it doesn't matter if that's early or late as long as it's true, right? That's what I like to say. Um, all right, Sean, thank you so much for that super sticker. Really appreciate that. Just noticed yesterday, Login 22 has basically as above, so below, as within, so without. And Login 3 has basically as the universe, so the soul. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't understand all the hype around the Emerald Tablet. I mean, to be honest, as above, so below is not even a great translation of the Emerald Tablet. But certainly the principles, of correspondence, that's pretty basic Platonism. I mean, you can put that in a hermetic dress, but that's just like we saw that already in the Timaeus. Like this world itself is a reflection, a designed reflection to look like the world of forms and to represent the world of forms and matter. So if that's what this universe is, then yes, as above, so below. I mean, there's nothing more basic than that. That is simple Platonism. Of course, you can give it like this mystical aura, maybe burn some incense and smoke some weed as you're saying it. But again, that's just simple Platonism. I mean, that's just so basic. And as we've seen, with the book by Ivan Miroshnikov, that the Gospel of Thomas is part of that Middle Platonic discourse. So these are themes in Middle Platonist discourse. If you just read Middle Platonist texts, you would also think that the soul is a microcosmos that corresponds to the macrocosmos. So absolutely nothing surprising about any of that. What is the common factor? Platonism. That's usually, the answer, right? I won't say it's the Sunday school answer, but I mean, that usually is the answer. Why are all these esoteric texts so very common? Well, because they really do. A lot of them are actually just based on that similar substratum, which is Platonism. Plato is the father of philosophy. He's the father of mysticism, right? Because his whole philosophy is about distinguishing our realm and linking it with a transcendent archetype. And one might argue he's the father of Gnosticism as well. Hopefully, we can distinguish Gnosticism and mysticism, but certainly however you think of it, there's a bit of mysticism in Gnosticism, right? If mysticism means that experience or experiential dimension of that higher realm. So thank you again for your super chat. Really appreciate it. All right. Let's see. This is NBA Young Guns, interesting name. Is there enough textual stability to determine the original words of Thomas between the existing Greek manuscripts? I'm not sure I understand your question, because you may be assuming that there are lots of Greek manuscripts of Thomas. In fact, there's only 3 pretty small Greek fragments of Thomas. So I believe we've got about 15% of it in Greek. So that wouldn't be a very good basis to determine the original words. Then again, you could say the same thing about any other Greek text, even if you had lots and lots of manuscripts. I think this is the same trap that many people fall into, that the Gospel of Thomas actually addresses this. There's a sort of cult of originality because people are they have in their heads that historicity means truth. But that's just not the case, certainly not in the spiritual domain. Even if absolutely nothing is original in Thomas, it could still be the only true gospel. I really want that to sink in. Even if absolutely nothing is original in Thomas, it could still be the only true gospel. And I really want that to sink in to everybody, that that's a truly Platonic insight, by the way, right? Like, the true Platonism says it doesn't matter when in time truth intersects with our world down here. In fact, in the true world, there is no time. So it doesn't matter when that truth intersects, when there's a tangent with our world, when a ray of divine light hits our world. That doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter if it's early or late, right? Why do people worry about whether Thomas is early? Because they want to use it to reconstruct the historical Jesus. But who cares about the historical Jesus? Right? I mean, you would already have to be thinking like an evangelical to really care about that stuff. But we don't think like evangelicals, right? Because the historical Jesus is mostly a figment of the imagination. I mean, it's a scholar's reconstruction. Why would you want to base your faith on it anyway? And then evangelicals are the ones who are wanting to say that Thomas is late simply so that they don't have to deal with it. Is it absolutely the case that some of the sayings in Thomas could be earlier or better versions than what we find in the synoptics? Absolutely. That's still the case. But determining which ones, there's the rub. So, is it Yoel BH? You're an MA student. Are your courses recorded? Do they have English subtitles? Well, the courses are recorded and then made available to people in the course. And there has to be a way to add captions. I don't usually add captions, but certainly if you join the course and ask me to add the captions, I will figure that out. So Not a worry, not a worry. Um, okay, okay, Lorenzo. So, what are the correlations between Aphrodite and Sophia? All right, this is not a Thomasine question. Hmm. That I would have to say, I'm not sure where you're coming from. Do you want to say more about the context of that question? Because I'm not sure where you want to go with that. It's actually not clear to me that there would be a lot of correlations between Aphrodite and Sophia. Aphrodite is not a favorite character among the Gnostics. uh, but if you let me know a bit more of the context of that question, I can maybe take a stab at that. Um, Matt, thank you for being here. One interesting thing about Gospel of Thomas is that it consists of teachings without a lot of narrative. Does that weigh in on authenticity? Well, again, authenticity isn't a matter of genre. It isn't a matter of, whether it's a sayings source or a narrative. Truth can shine through both sources. It or both genres. It just so happens that, the gospels that the early Catholics came to favor were narratives, um, and that the sayings gospels kind of died out. Not died out necessarily. I mean, completely. Obviously, we still have Thomas, and a lot of people think there was a Q, but they never got canonized. So there was something about the narrative style gospel that really hooked the, shall we say, really hooked early Catholics. There was something that they perceived as more powerful in the story. And certainly, like I've heard pastors say that, in order to evangelize someone or persuade someone, they've just handed them a copy of the Gospel of John, that there's something so powerful in the story that was enough to draw them in. A saying source, I'd like to think that people would be drawn in by the Gospel of Thomas, but often the result of reading the Gospel of Thomas, because it is a random list essentially, is that people are end up being confused. And if you are a dualistic thinker, that is, if you don't deal with ambiguity very well, and like everything is black and white to you, right or wrong, you're not going to like that. So um, that's just the truth. I don't know. Like it really depends. Like you either like this stuff or you don't. If you don't like it, if you can't deal with ambiguity, probably it means you're not going to like it. If you love ambiguity, you're going to like it. This spiritual truth is going to hit you like a train. I wouldn't. I would not in any way kind of want to connect that to authenticity. But I'm sure there's people I'm sure there's people who want to connect it to authenticity, right? Because they want to say that, oh, well, Q is the earliest. So saying sources, they must be really early. Well, not really. In fact, we have a bunch of sentence collections or maxims from Nag Hammadi, the teachings of Sylvanus and the sentences of Sextus. We have Pythagorean maxims. We've got Epicurus's, principal doctrines. So it's just a genre that some people worked with in order to communicate teaching from an authoritative person. Okay. Really, thank you so much. We have Justin the Sledgehammer. Thank you so much. He says the best text to practice Sehitic Coptic he learned on Thunder Perfect Mind. Ooh, okay, good for you. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I think if you're wanting to learn Coptic, I do actually teach Coptic. My one of my best students is Svava, and she's kindly written a recommendation for the course. She learned Coptic with me. It is doable, if people, don't get scared. But if you really want to read these Gnostic texts in their original language, that's not impossible. Think about it. and find a teacher. It could be me, could be someone else. But yeah, uh, I'm not sure. Thunder as a text for Seda Coptic. Actually, I think that's a great idea. So let me like that. I think that's a very, very good idea, actually. Very nice short sentences for thunder. Yeah, that's true. All right. So where do we leave off here? So, all right. It's all footnotes to Plato. Yep. Um, yep. There's Miroshnikov's book on Gospel of Thomas and Platonism. That's open access. So, you don't even need to pirate that one. He made that. He is himself Russian, and he made that free to everybody. So go read that. It's a dissertation coming out of Helsinki. Um, Dr. Linky, or didn't Dr. Linney, was there any gospels that were expected to originally be authored in Coptic? Well, sure. Yeah, there were gospel texts written in Coptic. Yep, there's lots of stuff written in Coptic, because Coptic is just the language of Egypt. So when Egypt was Christianized, you've got all sorts of gospels and usually called apocryphal texts, revelations that are written in Coptic between the third and 10th century. So absolutely. Um, and no, they weren't all considered translations from Greek. So um, if you know nothing of that world, you know, go find some other Coptic literature. Probably a nice place to start there is collections like other non-canonical gospels. Um, um, but yeah, you can look up Coptic literature online. I mean, there's a ton, absolutely a ton of stuff. It's not only Nag Hammadi, whew, it's a ton of stuff. Um, Gregory, what do I think of the Pagels' idea that the Gospel of John is trying to refute Thomasine ideas? I don't think so. There was in the 90s and early 2000s a strong kind of wing trying to say that Thomas and John were in conflict. I think that Thomas and John are 90% agreed on most things, and there is a 10% where they disagree on some stuff. But I don't take the extra sociological kind of like leap to say that these were individual communities that were in disagreement. In fact, if you follow scholars like Robin Faith Walsh and others, Stan Stowers, the idea of each gospel representing a community is probably a wrong way to think about how this happened. Gospels had real authors, and there were probably single authors. Whether or not they belonged to a community is another question. The Gospels may have eventually created community, but whether that they represent a pre-existing community, that's probably not the case. So, I mean, it's conceivable that I think that there were real people talking about real issues, obviously, but whether these gospels know each other, I'm not quite convinced by that. So in the case of the Gospel of John, trying to refute Thomasine ideas, it's really also based on a kind of simplistic reading of John 20, where Thomas is read as sort of like the dunce of the apostles, like uh, the black sheep, the fool, that he's the only one who doesn't see the resurrected Jesus first, and he has to get this empirical evidence. So like if anything, the Gospel of John is polemicizing against skepticism, unnecessary skepticism. But then, when you turn to the Gospel of Thomas, it's not really skeptical. It's not like saying, believe in the resurrection only if you see it, obviously not. In fact, the Gospel of Thomas doesn't really mention resurrection. It mentions something called the repose of the dead, but it's completely uninterested in the topic of resurrection. Um, so, are these in communication? I mean, maybe on a very general level, but I don't think that I don't think that John is trying to refute the the Gospel of Thomas. If you look at it, you've got a lot of similarities between Thomas. For Thomas, Jesus is the light above them all. In John, Jesus is the light of the world. And you've got both of them. Jesus, in both Gospels, Jesus appears in flesh. In both Gospels, Jesus says a bunch of I am statements. In both Gospels, Jesus uh, is represented as like this supernatural or superhuman divine teacher. So I think the amount of overlap and agreement is pretty overwhelming. So I don't. If and in fact, if I had to make an icon of Thomas and John, those icons that are really not historical, but the Roman Catholic Church likes these icons of Peter and Paul hugging each other. If I could make an icon, I would make an icon of Thomas and John hugging each other because I think there's a lot more um, similar than there is different. Um, okay, so Sean, I think many scholars believe the earliest philosophical Hermetica was just sayings. So that's one particular scholar, yeah. So that's Jean-Pierre Mahet, who thinks that, yeah, that all of the dialogues came out of maxims. Could be right. Could be right. It does definitely seem that the Gospel of John is creating whole discourses from individual sayings. So like he'll pick an individual saying like "I am the light of the world," and then he'll build out a discourse based on that saying. And that could be also how the Hermetic discourses came to be. That originally there was a maxim, something like um, the true God is something, and then the Son of God is the world, and then the second image of God is humanity, and boom, out of that saying you develop a whole discourse about how the world is the second God and humanity is the third God, and et cetera, et cetera. Oh yeah, that's right, Justin. Yeah, Thunder also has a lot of repetition, which is nice. Yeah, it's always nice when you get to see a repeated word. Definitely. So let me see here. Paul, we got a couple retracted messages here. It looks like I've got to the end here, which is amazing, unless I'm missing something. I just want to remind everyone that you can, again, get 10% off the Gospel of Thomas course just by hitting the link, which is pinned at the top of the comments. So take advantage of that. I know I didn't get to every single question. So if you do have questions, put them in now or forever hold your peace. With regard to Aphrodite and wisdom, I think one could say that Aphrodite and wisdom the best way to think about their relationship is to read the Exegesis of the Soul, which is in Nag Hammadi Codex 2. And I'm sure you've read that, Lorenzo. But what you'll see there is that it quotes Homer, and one of the quotes is from the Odyssey, Book 4, where Helen is saying that, the reason I went astray is I was deceived by Aphrodite. And basically, that's a poetic way of saying I got horny. So go use that on your next date. Say I'm sorry, I was deceived by Aphrodite. Meaning I'm really turned on right now. And that was her excuse. Now, whether that has anything to do with wisdom, I don't know. Because the exegesis of the soul is about the fall of the soul, and a lot of people talk about the fall of wisdom. But I don't know any version of the fall of wisdom where she actually, the reason why she falls is because of erotic love specifically. So I'm not sure where your question is going there. Again, let me know. Flavius, so when I talk about when we get into the course itself, I'm going to say a lot about saying 114. If any of you don't know saying 114, it's where Peter says that Mary should leave the group of disciples because she's a woman and therefore not worthy of life. And you're just waiting at that point for the woke Jesus to step in there and reprove that stupid hothead. But instead, he says something that seems even more stupid. That I'll take care of this. I will make her male, and then we'll be okay. So that is a tough one. It's especially tough because you've got a lot of women in the Gospel of Thomas who are the ones directly asking the questions. In the Gospel of Thomas, it's not Peter asking questions mostly. In fact, he only appears in saying 114 and in saying 13. But the ones who ask these really direct, precise questions in the Gospel of Thomas are Salome and Mariam or Mary. And of course, you've got saying 22 where you're supposed to make the male and the female one and the same. So, and then you get to saying 114 and all of a sudden the female has to become male. So that all that seems like really contradictory. The kind of cop-out answer is to say that 114, that this is a rolling corpus and that sayings were added one by one, and that, the 114th saying, which is the last one, was just tacked on at the end by some misogynist editor. And I just think that's far, far too easy. It is the case that in Nag Hammadi, there is a very, very common theme of basically gender trouble and gender transformation. It is absolutely the case that a Gnostic is transgendered, that your soul is female by nature. We see this in the exegesis of the soul. That doesn't come out quite clear in English, right? But Suki is feminine. So that sounded a bit better to Greeks. So yeah, part of a metaphor for salvation was to make your feminine soul masculine, which is to make it strong, right? Obviously not physically strong. We're thinking of strength in a Platonic sense. So there's a lot more that can be said there, and a lot more that will be said in the course. But again, this is just an initial initiation. So I hope you will all join the greater mysteries. Paul, any thoughts on the relationship between Paul and the Gospel of Thomas? Well, yes, that's going to be one of our sessions. So again, the course outline is definitely going to look at Paul and Thomas. It's going to look at the synoptics in Thomas. It's going to look at John and Thomas. Were the Thomas composers the people in Corinth Paul got angry at? That's an interesting question. I think the connection there is a connection because the people whom Paul is yelling at Corinth are people saying that they are rich and that they, Paul mocks them and says, already you've become rich, already you've become kings. And one of the themes in the Gospel of Thomas is becoming rich and ruling as a king. And so that's quite striking. It's as if Paul was picking a fight with the Gospel of Thomas, whereas the Gospel of Thomas hasn't been written yet. So what's going on here? Well, I think the connection actually is Alexandria, because the real Paul's real opponent in Corinth isn't the Corinthians, it's Apollos, who is from Alexandria. And I think Apollos carried with him some very different, from Alexandria, some very different traditions about Jesus. And he spread those in Corinth. And so when we get later an Alexandrian gospel, the Gospel of Thomas, those ideas get written down. And so it is the case that it looks like Paul's opponents in Corinth look like Thomasine Christians. Why is that? Because they're both presenting a version of Jesus and of salvation that is Alexandrine. So that would be my take on that. And that still has to be argued at length. That's very much of a hypothesis. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that Apollo had the Gospel of Thomas or that he wrote the Gospel of Thomas. No, I'm just saying that there was a very distinct portrayal of Jesus as a wisdom teacher in Alexandria that didn't accord with Paul's, slain deity whose blood is dripping off a cross. That just was not their cup of tea. And never was, never will be. You don't need to have a bloody death of a deity to have Christianity. You just don't. And Thomas, if it proves anything, it proves that very point. So again, I'm at the end of this chat, and so I don't see any more questions. I'm going to, again, very briefly go. Let me see. I'm going to go very briefly, just show people what the course is about and give you a sense for the course outline, just so that you all know what we're doing here. So again, 8 sessions, they're live with me. You can interact with friends. We're going to be introducing Thomas as an Alexandrian, I think as a exoteric Gnostic gospel, then looking at Thomas on Jesus, Thomas and the Synoptics, Thomas is the seedbed for the Gospel of John, Thomas and Paul, Thomas and women, Thomasine ethics, and Thomasine deification. These are our 8 sessions. Consider this your summer school training on your gift to yourself. If you've been interested in Thomas, this might be your one and only chance to talk about Thomas with like-minded people who won't shut you down. So think about taking the course. In the coming days, there should be an interview released with Andrew Henry, and you'll get to learn more about the course. And so look at Religion for Breakfast as well. And let's see, we've got Kang, Thomas, the best disciple. He required proof other disciples seem kind of dumb. Well, of course, that's the opposite of what the author of John wants you to think, that Thomas is sort of the dumb one because he wants empirical evidence. That doesn't sit well, admittedly, with modern scientific thinking, but blessed is he who has not seen and believed. If that was really what Christianity says, and it is, do we owe science to Christianity? Probably not. But anyway, it may still be true. Anyway, well, I just want to thank everyone for coming here. And I want to thank Dr. Sledge for being here. Frater, thank you so much. You wish you knew more about Thomas and had some questions. Well, you will definitely have questions at the end of the course, maybe enraged questions. And questions are good. Questions, according to Thomas, are the way you gain eternal life. So definitely ask those questions. Keep asking. And I hope to see all of you in the course. I hope to see all of you and to meet all of you face to face and person to person to get to know you. So use this as your opportunity. I want to thank everybody for showing up at this live session. And again, if you haven't already, click that link on the top so that you can get the 10% off. That will disappear when this live stream ends. So I want to make sure everyone hits that link. Um, until next time, I want to wish everyone a very, very happy Monday evening or Tuesday morning or wherever you are in the world. Thank you again for helping me in this journey and helping me help you, hopefully, and making this worthwhile and something valuable. So until we see each other again, hopefully soon, be well and take care.